It's hard to claim anything but the Millennium Falcon takes the top spot on the list of most important ships in Star Wars. But if you move down to number 2, in my opinion, one ship stands out as the clear favorite, the Chimaera. The Chimaera was established in the Thrawn trilogy by Timothy Zahn in the 90s, and since then it's consistently made its way back to the spotlight despite being presumed destroyed, scrapped, or eaten by whales, throughout not just legends, but also canon. When writing the Thrawn trilogy, Zahn knew the ship would be so iconic that he even used it to inspire the name of another major Legends character introduced in the trilogy, the wife of Luke Skywalker, Chimaera Jade. When we first see the Chimaera in the Thrawn trilogy, it's serving as the flagship of Grand Admiral Thrawn, who had recently returned from the unknown regions to lead the rudderless and fracturing Empire, as it reeled in the wake of the loss of Coruscant and other important territory to the New Republic, the new dominant power in the Star Wars galaxy. We have a bit of information on what the Chimaera was up to before this point as well. It was in service by at least the time of the Battle of Yavin as an Imperial II class Star Destroyer, which you can usually tell from the horizontal rather than vertical X on the command tower, as well as by the banks of octuple batteries flanking the overall command structure. The earliest appearance of this ship is in the novel Choices of One, also by Timothy Zahn, and by that point its command crew already included Gilad Pellaeon, who was the captain of the ship under Thrawn, although he was only a senior bridge officer when it was under the command of Captain Kalo Drusan during Choices of One. Choices of One established the earliest days of Pellaeon and the Chimaera's relationship with Thrawn, having them work under then senior Captain Thrawn's command against a warlord named Nuso Esfra from the Unknown Regions, who was threatening action against the Empire in the known galaxy. Pellaeon helped Thrawn stop Nuso Esfra, who had then been posing as Lord Odo on the Chimaera itself, under an invitation from Drusan, who Esfra had promised he would be able to help defeat a rebel fleet and thereby ensure Drusan's promotion to Admiral. This didn't exactly work out for him. Drusan was killed, but while the campaign didn't get Drusan the promotion he was hoping for, it did play a significant role in getting Pellaeon promoted to be the Chimaera's captain, and it's likely what secured Pellaeon and the Chimaera as Thrawn's first choice for a protege and a flagship when he returned from the Unknown Regions to lead the Empire in the Thrawn trilogy many years later. In the 8 years between the Battle of Yavin and Thrawn taking over the Empire, Pellaeon and the Chimaera continued to reinforce Thrawn's initial impression of the ship and her captain as both being efficient and highly capable. There were brief appearances of the Chimaera in other media like the X-Wing Alliance game, where it and some of the other Star Destroyers from Thrawn's Future Core Armada show up in a mission at Kurita, but this is basically just a brief cameo. They're not really the focus of anything there. By the time of the Battle of Endor, the Chimaera was highly placed within Darth Vader's Death Squadron, where it, as the flagship of a barely existing character named Admiral Horst Strage, was the third in the chain of command after the Executor and another communication ship, the Pride of Tarlandia. As the fighting wore on, following the destruction of the Death Star and the many higher-ranking admirals, including not just Palpatine and Vader within Death Squadron, but also multiple Grand Admirals, Pellaeon eventually found himself as the highest-ranking member of the fleet, able to give a retreat order that people would actually listen to, pulling what remained of Death Squadron and some of the other Imperial forces back to the nearby Anaj system. Pellaeon and the Chimaera didn't retain their command of Imperial forces beyond this point, as the Empire began to fall under the sway of various Imperial splinter factions, and even at Anaj, which only represented a small portion of the overall Imperial forces, there was some disagreement about whether or not Pellaeon had made the right call. But despite these setbacks, Pellaeon and the Chimaera managed to maintain their reputations until the return of Thrawn, who was the first real hope the Empire had of turning the conflict around against the New Republic. Chimaera was the keystone of several major battles during the Thrawn campaign, which we'll go into more detail on in an upcoming animated campaign breakdown, but it ended up in tragedy for the Chimaera as its command chair was stained by the blood of Thrawn when his bodyguard assassinated him at the Battle of Bilbringi. Pellaeon was once again forced to call for a retreat of all Imperial forces at the battle, eventually finding himself and Chimaera under the command of a cloned and reborn Emperor Palpatine in Operation Shadow Hand 2 years after Thrawn's death. There were 2 pieces of good news for Pellaeon at this point, the first being that he and the Chimaera's crew could like and subscribe for more videos here on Corey's Datapad, which would bring us up to the 100,000 subscribers mark if the ship's whole crew subscribed. The second was that he had been promoted yet again, becoming a Vice Admiral, but the bad news is he was soon separated from his longtime command when he attempted to take Duro from the New Republic. Instead, the New Republic fought off his attack, heavily damaging Chimaera and taking it from him. Pellaeon, despondent at the lack of cohesion in the Empire and the loss of his crew, who can no longer subscribe to help me reach 100,000 subscribers, meaning the job falls to you, joined Warlord Pterodoc's forces in the Deep Core. We don't really know much of what the Chimaera was up to in the New Republic. Its capture only exists in offhand mentions and sourcebooks, while the recapture we're about to get to is part of a blurb about the Ankh species 99 pages into issue 7 of the Star Wars Gamer RPG magazine, so we're not exactly talking deep narrative juices here. At least 2 years later, so sometime between 13 and 17 years after the Battle of Yavin, Pelion was in charge of the Imperial Navy as a whole, approaching the position of Grand Admiral, and he put a plan in place to retrieve his lost flagship. An order was falsified within the New Republic for the ship to be decommissioned and deconstructed, sending it to maintenance yards on Gravlix Med, nearby the shrinking territory of the Imperial Remnant itself. With the order underway, Imperial commandos were deployed to intercept it, overwhelming the skeleton crew and returning it to Pelion. The fact that this worked at all implies the ship probably wasn't really used in active duty under the New Republic, since a real captain and crew stationed on it might have looked more into why their ship was being scrapped compared to just a hulk that had been sitting there in need of repairs for a couple years already. Pelion retained Chimaera as his flagship with a man named Ardif as its captain throughout the remainder of the war with the New Republic, which was ended after Pelion saw the writing on the wall and convinced the rest of the Empire to sue for peace, despite strong pushback in the form of a fake Grand Admiral Thrawn showing up to attempt to oust him. The resulting peace deal, the Pelion-Gavrisum Treaty, was signed on Chimaera by Pelion himself and the New Republic's chief of state, a large bird named Ponk Gavrisum, though technically he'd say he's called a Calibop. The next time the Chimaera shows up is about 6 years later in 25 ABY. Pelion was still holding Chimaera as his flagship going into the start of the Yuuzhan Vong War in the New Jedi Order series. It appeared under his command for the Battle of Ithor in Darktide Ruin, and it makes it through most of the war until the Battle of Bastion, where Chimaera's command bridge was rammed by an enemy fighter, along with sustaining other heavy damage as it and its crew tried to hold together a very disorganized defense against a surprise attack on the Imperial capital by the extragalactic invaders. Pelion survived, but he was forced to move his flag to the Right to Rule, described as one of the oldest Star Destroyers in the fleet, while the Chimaera was presumed to be unsalvageable. In reality, it spent most of the next decade and a half in hiding, having been secretly transferred by Pelion to his ally and former commander Natassi Dalla, who'd re-established herself in the Maw, where she had once commanded the defense of an Imperial research facility, telling Pelion she would be available if he ever needed to call on her for help. That moment came in the Second Galactic Civil War during the Second Battle of Fondor in 40 ABY. The Empire had joined with the New Republic in a new government, the Galactic Alliance, but it had been taken over by a Sith Lord, Darth Kaitis, also known as Jacen Solo, the son of Han and Leia. Pelion was assassinated during the battle, but Dalla arrived in command of an upgraded Chimaera at the head of her fleet, the Maw Irregular Fleet, an eclectic assortment of ships outfitted with experimental weaponry like the metal crystal phase shifters, which were able to deeply penetrate enemy hulls. This was key in winning the battle for the forces against Kaitis, which allowed Dalla to then become Chief of State of the Galactic Alliance following the war's conclusion, though she was herself forced out by the Jedi. She remained in control of Chimaera, captained now by Tors Rimal, and it remained part of the forces remaining personally loyal to Natassi Dalla. After she was forced out of the Galactic Alliance, she attempted a coup in the Empire, which was now independent, culminating in the Battle of Exito II between Natassi Dalla's forces and the forces of Jagged Fel. The battle was won by Jag Fel, who had the assistance of Thrawn's former Empire of the Hand, a group Thrawn had set up during the time of his conflict with Nuso Esfa, where Thrawn first worked with the Chimaera, and this defeat is the final time the Chimaera appeared in the Legends continuity. So everything was kind of coming full circle for the Chimaera. Funnily enough, the books where both of these things happened, Fate of the Jedi Apocalypse for the Battle of Exodo II, and Choices of One for the Nuso Esfa conflict, were both released within about 9 months of each other. So 2011 to 2012 was a big time for Chimaera fans. While this alone would secure Chimaera a place as one of the most important ships in Legends, its return to canon has cemented it in that position just below the Falcon across all of Star Wars, making it also one of the only ships to show up in books, animation, and live action. It was first reintroduced with Grand Admiral Thrawn in Star Wars Rebels, where Thrawn is using it as his flagship before even the Battle of Yavin, and in this continuity it's closer to a modified Imperial 1 class, especially given the timeline, than an Imperial 2. The bridge when it shows up in Ahsoka is the 2 style, but the details there are also consistent with the conning tower just being knocked over. And considering they basically always use the Rogue One Star Destroyer model for things, so this seems like a very intentional change to that model for the Chimaera here. The other big physical change for the ship between the Legends and canon version is of course the giant sigil painted on the underside. In the new canon's Thrawn trilogy, Chimaera once again helps Thrawn against a potential incursion by enemies from the unknown regions, the Grisk, in cooperation with Gilad Pellaeon aboard another Star Destroyer, only in this version, Thrawn is the one on Chimaera, and Pellaeon is the captain of Harbinger, a ship in Grand Admiral Balinhai Savit's third fleet. It turned out Savit had been trying to undermine Project Stardust and was exposed by Thrawn in cooperation with Gilad Pellaeon. So in both continuities, when Zan wrote the earliest days of cooperation between Thrawn and Pellaeon, it basically involves getting rid of Pellaeon's existing superior officer. Rebels ends with Chimaera and Harbinger in pretty rough shape after the attack by the Purrgil, though with Chimaera in particular, that damage included being brought to an entirely different galaxy, leaving Thrawn, his forces, and the Night Mothers having to repair extensive damage in order to return the ship to functionality. With the help of Morgan, Balin, and Shin, they are able to return the Chimaera to the known galaxy with Thrawn on board. We don't know yet where the story is taking the Chimaera, but it's once again finding itself in a pretty central position in Star Wars storytelling, as we get to the upcoming Ahsoka Season 2, and possibly even a movie appearance for the ship in Filoni's Mandalorian movie, depending on where that all lands. But that's going to do it for our look at Chimaera as the second most important ship in Star Wars. Let me know if there's another ship you think should have taken this spot instead, but thank you for watching, and hope to see you next time.